that we could start.
Well, great, thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to be presenting our theoretical case where our client has asked us to take a look at the ethical ramifications of wellness programs, specifically based on attainment or participation-based incentives. So with that, we're going to take a look at our agenda today. We're going to look at the background on the healthcare industry, trends that we're seeing, as well as our client situation, and also some casework, some legal framework of compliance issues, as well as ethics frameworks, and then our recommendations. So the current crisis in the healthcare industry in America today is really escalating. Currently, right now, the total expenditures of healthcare in general is about $1.9 trillion. That's about 17% of GDP currently, and so basically we're only seeing it rise further and further. They estimate it's going to be about 25% of GDP by 2025. So really there's a lot of costs going on, a lot of personal expenses, a lot of corporate expenses at stake here. Currently, it's for employers to provide healthcare insurance for their employees, it's about $5,000 per employee. So whether you're a small company or a large company, can really have a really harsh effect on your bottom line, and being able to minimize those costs is definitely what we're looking to do. Also, a current trend is our aging population in the workforce. A lot of baby boomers, about 42%, are saying that they're going to be extending their retirement. So they're not going to be retiring at the normal age of 62 anymore. As well, about 25% of them say that they're not going to retire at all. And that basically means that companies are going to be actually having to pay for insurance for these employees much longer than they had currently estimated, and it will actually grow their costs. Also, a part of this, which is an ongoing issue, is actual disparities in between socioeconomic classes. So if someone is more advantaged, they have more ability to actually lead a healthier lifestyle. For example, they're able to buy more organic foods or have gym memberships or do things that are more healthy and sustainable for their life. Whereas someone that may not be as advantaged may not be able to afford those kinds of luxury items. And subsequently, they're going to be relying more on healthcare needs to maintain their life and their healthy status. So where do we save the money? Where can we really help promote employees? Well, that's in wellness programs. Not only can we actually have more retention with our employees and have a healthier workforce and less absenteeism, we can actually drastically affect our bottom line. And that is through discounted premiums from the insurance companies through wellness programs. So oftentimes, insurance companies come to corporations and say, if you create an attainment-based wellness program and you're able to make a healthier workforce population, we can actually give you discounted premiums. And this can drastically affect the overall cost expenditures of the healthcare insurance for companies and for the employee. So to give you a little bit of background about wellness programs, the overall wellness program is a voluntary basis. Wellness programs are legally required to be voluntary. And what we mean by this as well is a purely voluntary basis means that there is no incentive for the employee except for their own personal welfare to take part in the program. So for example, companies can give out nutrition ideas, nutrition facts, maybe make it known, maybe some exercise regimens that might help. But the information is provided, but it's not required to be done by the employee. A subset of that is an incentive-based program. And the two different kinds of incentives for wellness programs are participation-based and attainment-based. And we'll go down a little bit deeper into those. So the flavors of incentives or disincentives, first they start with participation. And a reward-based participation incentive program can actually mean that the employee is rewarded for being in the wellness program. So for example, this can be things like discounted gym memberships or additional break time to go and exercise in the workplace, to even healthier foods available in the actual cafeteria. Now the kind of disincentive or change of flavor would be actually a penalization of not participating. So in some cases, which we'll dig down deeper into later, the employee is actually surcharged for not being a part of the program. So this comes into effect on their weekly paycheck, because they do not want to take part, they have to pay for that. And then an attainment-based wellness program actually has the insurance company set goals for each individual employee. So for example, if you have a population of about 20% smokers in your workforce, if you can minimize that to about 10%, the insurance company will be able to offer the company a discounted premium. And actually for individual employees, if they reach their goal, so say they do end up quitting smoking, they can actually get their own personal rebates back from the insurance company for meeting that goal. And that can be up to about 50% of their insurance premiums. Now, this may be a little bit unfair depending on the socioeconomic classes we were talking about, because people that already are advantaged have a better ability to meet those goals and achieve those goals outside of the workforce than someone that may not be able to, for the same reason of the healthier food options and someone that may not be able to afford that. So, our client situation, they're actually a large company in the area. They have about 140,000 employees, and they operate in about 50 different countries. So they have a large workforce, and they really can see some really good cost savings if they can implement a positive wellness program, as well as they want to make sure that it's fair and equitable for all of their employees, not advantaging some and disadvantaging others. Something to note about their company, they do provide healthcare for all of their employees, so everyone is able to be insured, part-time or full-time. And so that can actually cost them about $200 million a year, and that's quite a lot. It's actually more than their raw materials for their product. Also something to note, what happened is that their insurance provider came to them and said, if you can create an attainment-based wellness program in your company, we can offer you discounted premiums. So they have come to us and asked us, what are those ethical implications of creating a incentivized wellness program? And first, we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the legal aspects of wellness programs and having incentives based on wellness. And Yolanda's going to take us through that.
Thank you, Jenny. So besides wanting to attain an ethical wellness program for our company, we wanted to note that there are some regulations that need to be noted, such as HIPAA, ERISA, GINA, ADA, and such. We wanted to also point out that these rules go into detail, into really deep. It can go so deep that it would take days to go over every single rule. But briefly, we wanted to explain, like for example, a rule of thumb that the Boston Consulting Group uses is that similarly situated employees cannot be discriminated when it comes to deductibles or premium costs just because of different healthcare factors between two employees. For instance, if Jenny and I were employed by a company and we both were at the same grade level and we paid the same premium amount for healthcare, and let's say that I had diabetes, the healthcare insurance company wouldn't be, they couldn't charge me more just because I had diabetes. I am therefore protected by these laws. So there, for instance, during our research, we found out several lawsuits that dealt with these laws being violated. For example, there was, in the case of Bradley Seth versus Broward County, it was a class action lawsuit that was filed on December 6th, and a ruling was reached on April 11th. And the lawsuit dealt with a wellness program where the employer added a surcharge to their employees who didn't participate in the voluntary program. Now, this was supposed to be a voluntary program, but why did they surcharge the employees with the $20 surcharge? That doesn't seem fair. But let me go into the details of the lawsuit. That way you can understand the case a little bit better. The employer put in place a healthcare wellness program where it had two components. One was the online health risk assessment, and the second one was a biometric screening. The online health risk assessment was a survey that was supposed to be completed online. It had about 100 questions that asked about everything about your healthcare, whether you were stressed out, whether you exercised on a regular basis, etc. And the biometric screening test was just a cholesterol and glucose finger pricking test that was accomplished by taking a test at home with a kit. That was an at-home kit. And employees who didn't participate in this voluntary program were surcharged with $20 that was taken from their paycheck. And that could amount up to $520 a year if you did the math and if you didn't participate. Now, just something to note is that this wellness program did not require employees to attain a certain level of healthcare, a certain level of health. They weren't penalized for not achieving the right BMI, etc. However, they pinpointed employees who had any of these 5 diseases. If you had asthma, hypertension, diabetes, congestive heart failure, or kidney disease, the wellness program would contact you with your healthcare provider, and they would provide medications so as to mitigate your ailment, so that you could better take care of yourself. And so this was a way of helping employees, and these people who had these diseases would get medications for free. Next. So because there was a lot of, because employees were being contacted by the healthcare wellness program and the insurance, Mr. Bradley Seff, he was pretty upset about it, and he filed a lawsuit and said that his ADA civil rights were being violated because there was a $20 surcharge, and that he felt that he was being forced, and he was being forced to participate in the program. And however, Broward County, the defendant, stipulated that none of that was happening and that the program was strictly voluntary. And so when the lawsuit was filed on behalf of 5,000 employees, next slide, the Southern District of California granted the defendant's motion for summary judgment and found Broward County, which was the employer, not guilty. So the $20 surcharge was actually legal, and this pretty much, even though it seems unethical that the $20 was being added as a surcharge, it stipulated that it is still legal. And for our client, we wanted to make sure that we provide something ethical, not just legal. So Aaron will get into the details of the ethical frameworks.
So thanks for providing that background on the case. And I think we should take these takeaways from the Broward Seff case and see how they apply to our client's situation, starting with an analysis of the employee stakeholders and how a wellness incentive program would impact their lives. To simplify that picture, let's consider that our client's organization has many employees, lots of different strata, and we'll simplify that into 2. We've got the frontline employees, of which there are 140,000 approximately, and people like that make $22,000 each year. We call them Joe, so that's our character Joe here. We also have corporate office employees. There are 3,000 of them, and they're on the order of $80,000 a year annual salaries, and we call them Mary. So keep these 2 pictures in mind. They're 2 poles of the employee base of our client's firm. Now, the lives of these two groups of people are very different, right? Because Mary has disposable income to spend on her own health and well-being. She can go to the farmer's markets and buy organic food, and she can hire someone to take care of her kids when she needs to go take care of her own wellness. Whereas Joe, on the front line, doesn't have the luxury to do any of those things. So a wellness incentive would impact these two groups in different ways, and it would increase the disparity between Mary and Joe. Remember, though, that our company, our client's company, contains many different levels of employees. There are about 100 job titles at this company, and we're just examining 2 simple cases. We can apply the current thinking from the literature on this question. This comes from Harold Schmidt in the New England Journal of Medicine, in an op-ed. He wrote that these attainment incentives are fundamentally unfair because of how they impact different levels of employees. The advantaged gain more advantage through attainment incentives, and the disadvantaged see less reward. That current thinking can come through into a stakeholder analysis, which is how we did we completed ethical treatment. We considered the shareholders as stakeholders in this company. Sort of the classic case, they may not be satisfied with strictly voluntary incentive programs, because the trend for the entire industry is to move everybody to greater and greater incentives to deal with their own health and well-being. So the shareholders may be pushing for more of an incentive program. They'd be happy to see participation incentives or attainment incentives. We consider the customers, who are pretty agnostic in this case. The customers want to see happy employees, happy, well employees, so any wellness program will probably be reflected better in their perspective. We also consider the regulators, because they, in the case of Seth versus Broward County, they ruled on a participation incentive. We found that that's a compliant way to run your incentive program. That was a judge ruling. The regulators themselves have not issued any guidance on these questions. So the regulators would be currently in support of strictly voluntary incentives. And we don't know, they're weighing right now the pluses and the minuses of these different incentive programs. Employees, however, is really what makes this case, because strictly voluntary programs are positive for every employee at the company. Participation incentives are positive if the incentive is structured properly, and can be very negative, as we saw in Seth versus Broward County. And attainment incentives are negative for everybody across the board. So let's zoom into this employee perspective. Back to our characters, Mary and Joe. Mary has enough disposable income to absorb any kind of negative incentive that the company imposes on her. Right, so if Mary is charged with bringing her BMI in line with a health metric that's guided by the health insurance company, or if Mary needs to reduce her triglyceride levels, she can choose to participate in that or not, and the negative incentive doesn't have so much of an influence on her behavior, right? It does in the case of Joe, because Joe has all of these other obligations in his life. He has to take care of his family, and he has a small salary. He doesn't have disposable income to spend on his own health and well-being. Strictly voluntary incentives are okay with Mary. Participation disincentives are easily absorbed, so we would think that she would consider them not significant. Participation incentives are definitely pro for Mary. She's willing to get on board and make herself healthy. And attainment incentives are fine with Mary too, because she can easily absorb those extra costs. She's going to go to yoga classes as well. She's going to buy the healthy food that she thinks she deserves. In the case of Joe, strictly voluntary is okay. Participation disincentives are certainly negative. That impacts his bottom line directly. Participation incentives that works for Joe as well. Attainment incentives, however, should be across the board seen as a negative influence on Joe. So we conclude that wellness incentives may increase inequalities between these employees, and we recommend, based on that analysis, that we scan the wellness program of our client's firm, and we remove any participation disincentives that are in there. We remove attainment incentives, and we promote positive participation incentives. If our company is giving employees time during the workday for exercise, and if they're sponsoring healthy foods in the cafeteria where everyone eats, those programs should be promoted because they affect across the board. We also recommend that health risk assessments and biometric screenings are entirely voluntary, and so we mean no incentives at all in engaging in those programs. And we also recommend increasing the base of voluntary participation. So our company is global, and we would like to see, we would recommend anyway, that that those health and wellness programs expand to greater participation. So I'd like to leave you with some thoughts on what the future may hold. The regulators will eventually issue guidance on this topic, so keep your eyes on these government institutions. I'd also like to note that participation disincentives have been found compliant with the ADA, with current laws in St. Broward County. But legality is not ethical, right? So our company is promoting an ethical culture for all their employees. And in our analysis, even though that incentive structure complies with current laws, it is not an ethical ground for them to build their wellness program. And yet there's been no judgment on attainment incentives. So thanks for listening, and we'll take your questions.